So I recently built an app that generated $3.98 in revenue, and I'm pretty excited about it. So I wanted to share this experience because a lot of people out there might be having the same issues that I had, where building apps and writing code is almost the easy part. But finding someone who's going to use your app or even pay for your app is way harder and at some points feels impossible. And not to mention, sitting at 0 users after spending your time building something is super depressing. So let's talk about what I built, the process I took to build my app and gain users along the way, and how I eventually converted those users into paid customers. So it all started back in 2021 actually, when I joined the fantasy football league. And during that year, we were obsessed with trading. So we would trade our players and try to build better teams. And for almost every trade, we would use a tool called Keep Trade Cut, which would analyze our trades and let us see who won or lost the trades, which also let us catch any kind of collusion in our league as well. But the issue was that this Keep Trade Cut tool was really tedious to use. It was covered in ads and pop-ups whenever you would go to the website. So a lot of times we wouldn't really analyze trades at all and we would just let them slip through and not really care that much about it. But we still cared about the trade analysis, we just didn't want to go through the work to analyze the trade through this tool. So what I did, being the software engineer, was I built a Firebase function cron job specifically for my league that would run in the cloud, continuously poll our league for new trades, and whenever it found a new trade, it would convert that trade into a Keep Trade Cut permalink, and then post that link to our league chat. Now keep in mind, this was a really brittle script. I had to use Puppeteer to log in to the Fantasy Football League and post the link to our league chat from my personal account, but it didn't really matter. It got the job done for our league, people were satisfied, people thought it was cool, and that was it. Now that was all the way back in 2021. So fast forward to 2023, I was scrolling through Zillow one day just looking for a house, and that's when I realized I was broke, or at least broke enough for the current housing market. And unless I did something or changed up my approach, I was never going to be able to afford a house. So the obvious thing to do here is I started reading books. But more importantly, I read this book called The Lean Startup so that I could learn to become an entrepreneur and maybe get rich along the way. Now, The Lean Startup was a really good book, and I wanted to apply my learnings for that. Fantasy football season was coming up again, so I thought, maybe we could turn that trade analyzer from a few years ago into a public product that any league out there could use. Because in reality, the fantasy football market is pretty big, and people out there are already spending money on their leagues. Like, there's a prize pool for most leagues where the winner gets money. Maybe I could sell something here. But more importantly, money aside, I really like fantasy football, and I really felt like this tool could help leagues out there. So there was a passion part of this too. I wasn't in it just solely to make money. So with that, it was time to start building. I wasn't exactly sure where to start, but one of the key concepts from the Lean Startup was to stop wasting time. And before you go out there and build some amazing app with a bunch of features, you should really start with a more minimal MVP so that you can verify the idea and see if people actually want to use your product. So that's exactly what I did. I wanted to see if people were interested in this idea at all. So all I did was build a landing page that talked about the product and what it would do. And I also added an email sign-up form on the landing page where users could put in their email and basically subscribe to be notified whenever the app went live. And this email sign-up form was the main way I was going to gauge interest for the product. The cool thing about this was I really only spent like a day building this landing page. So it was all just HTML. I used Tailwind CDN for the styling, threw a Google Analytics script on there just to monitor traffic, and then hosted it on Firebase so that I could get a somewhat clean .web.app domain, which is the default on Firebase, so I didn't even have to buy a domain either. And then for the email signup functionality, I just hooked it up to MailChimp. This was the first time I ever used MailChimp, and honestly, I'll probably never use it again. We'll talk more about that later. So the landing page was done, but how would I market it? So obviously I wanted to go wherever my potential customers were, and that turned out to be pretty easy. So fantasy football is all over the social media sites. So the place I felt was easiest was Reddit. So there's already tons of fantasy football subreddits out there, so all I would have to do is post in one of those subreddits. I'll admit this was a little bit intimidating because I didn't want to come off as someone self-promoting or spamming. But like back to where this all started, this was something I was passionate about. I did want to see leagues use this and find it helpful. So in terms of posting this on Reddit, it was pretty easy. Just come off as genuine and people will probably appreciate it. So in the end, posting on Reddit turned out pretty successful. I did get 17 email signups. Also got some feedback from people saying that Keep Trade Cut wasn't really a great tool to use. So I kept that in mind. That was helpful. I did feel like 17 email signups did validate the idea, especially for just one Reddit post. Plus the fact that people might be a little reluctant to just throw their email in random forms on the internet. But it was still not as many signups as I'd hoped. So looking back, I kind of wish I had spent more time trying to validate the initial idea and maybe even pivoting before building anything. But nonetheless, I was eager. I decided to build it anyways, especially since I was going to use this thing for my own league anyways. So now was the fun part. It was time to build the real product. So again, back to the principles of the lean startup. Don't waste time, build the minimum product necessary to validate the idea and see if it works well with your customers. So from the engineering side, I wanted to figure out the architecture first. So on the front end, I created a sign up form where users would put in an invite link to their fantasy football league, as well as their email address so that I could contact them about any potential integration issues. And when the user submitted that form, all it would do was save that information to a Firebase database. And then from there, I would manually take the league invite link, use that link to join the fantasy football league, not from my personal account this time. And now that my bot account was in the league, I had permission to post in the league chat. So all I had to do from there was update the cron job that I created back in 2021 to work for all the leagues that my bot account had joined. So a lot of this was automated. There was the manual part of manually joining the leagues, but I felt like that would take a lot of effort to automate, and I felt like I could handle that manual process. So back to the idea here, I didn't want to waste time. In terms of technology, I built the front end with Next.js, mostly because I'm really comfortable with React. All of my pages just needed to be static, and Next.js would automatically static render them at build time, which made the whole app blazingly fast. And for the sign up form, I got to play with the new Next.js 13 server actions, which was really fun, and most importantly, allowed me to build this whole thing in probably less than a week. So then for the backend, I stuck with the same old Firebase function cron job, just adjusted that to work for multiple leagues. I actually ended up ditching Puppeteer for logging into the fantasy football tool and posting to league chats. And this wasn't even by choice. This ended up being a huge blocker. The reason was that the login page on the fantasy football app actually added a CAPTCHA, which it didn't have back in 2021, and this made it nearly impossible to automate the login through a web browser. So what I did instead, which is kind of quirky, not recommended, is I reverse engineered the API that the fantasy football website used for sending chat messages, and then just use that API call in my own backend. So probably not a good idea to build a product based off reverse engineering somewhat private APIs, but it did unblock us here. So just in time, fantasy football season was fast approaching, and it was time to hand off V1 of the app back to the marketing team. So how in the world were we going to get beta testers for this? Turns out we already had some, and we already had their emails to contact them. So thinking back to the initial landing page where we were trying to validate the product, we had 17 people sign up. And even better, these people were already interested in the product and wanted to use it. So in MailChimp, I tried sending an initial email to all of the people who had subscribed from the initial landing page. And right off the bat, boom, MailChimp instantly suspended my account. And even better, there wasn't really any specific reason that they suspended the account. It was just some generic message, and that was pretty much it. So honestly, MailChimp was already a pain anyways, so I wasn't too worried about this. So I just exported all of the MailChimp users and went and found a different email provider. So the one I ended up using was called MailerLite. Would recommend. It was super easy to use, and I didn't have any issues and sent out the emails in probably less than an hour. And even better, they had super easy to read analytics to see how many people had opened your email, how many people had clicked a link in the email. It was just great. I liked it. So for that single bulk email that I sent out, 35% of people clicked the link and opened the TradeFox website, which led to about 5 signups through the flow, which was great. We verified it worked. So then I created another follow-up post on Reddit. Didn't feel too great about it, didn't want to spam on Reddit, but wanted to do one more just to get it out there. And that led to 5 more signups as well. But putting my analytics hat on, this was not enough users. And luckily I had set up Google Analytics on the front end. And this turned out to be super important for the next takeaway that I got from the lean startup. And that was the process of build, measure, learn. So you build something, in this case, it was our application, and then you measure it with something like Google Analytics, and then you validate whatever you were trying to learn with those analytics. And the interesting thing about build, measure, learn is that you actually look at it from the inverse. So first you identify what you want to learn, what you're trying to validate. In this case, it was if people out there were interested in the approach we took for this tool. And then you need to figure out how you're going to measure the experiment in accordance with what you're trying to learn. So in this case, it was something like setting up Google Analytics and just tracking events along the funnel. And then you build basically the bare minimum necessary in order to measure what you're trying to learn, which in this case was the initial MVP, where users would sign up and the bot would join their league. So based off the analytics or the measurement, I noticed that a lot of people were dropping off on the sign up page. So people were interested in the product, but when they went to the sign up page, they didn't sign up, which made me think maybe I'm taking the wrong approach here. Maybe people were interested, but they weren't too sure about having a random bot join their league, because I guess technically I could log in with that bot and spy on people's leagues if I wanted to. I also called out on the sign up form that leagues would have to change some of their settings in order for the bot to be able to join their league, and all of that might have just turned people off and been confusing and swayed them away from signing up. So based off that, it was time. The analytics was telling me to pivot. So the vision was still in place. I still wanted to build a tool that would help people analyze trades in their league, but it was time to take a different approach to accomplish that. So I decided to ditch the whole push notifications and league joining feature altogether, ditch the sign up form, and go fully web. So with this approach, what the user would do was go to the TradeFox website, put in their league ID, which would find their league and list all of the recent trades in their league, and then they could click one of those trades and it would bring up the trade analysis for that trade. And the best part was that all of this was going to be in context. So there wasn't going to be some sort of redirect to an external trade analyzer. It was all going to be hosted on the website. And in fact, it actually couldn't be in context anymore. So I decided to switch to the trade analyzer that the person had mentioned in Reddit called Fantasy Calc. So no more keep trade cut. And this Fantasy Calc tool didn't have permalinks to the trades. So I couldn't just have a link that redirected to Fantasy Calc for the trade analysis. So thankfully, this trade analyzer that I migrated to, Fantasy Calc, had an API where I could just get the values of players in a structured way. All I had to do was give them credit, which was totally worth it because they deserve it. Now, I also didn't want to spam their API for every request to my website, so I created a Firebase Functions cron job that would hit their API every single day and cache the players in my own Firebase database. And then in terms of technology on the front end, I was still using Next.js. So all I did was refactor the existing app that had the sign up form approach, threw some new routes on for searching for a league by ID, and then another route that would list all of the trades for the league, and lastly a route that would show the analysis for a trade. And of course, Next.js turned out perfect here because I got to do all of the API calls and all of the trade analysis work server-side, and end up server-side rendering everything, which turned out pretty great for performance. I also probably didn't have to, but I decided to buy a domain because buying domains is kind of fun. So I bought tradefox.app. I think it was only like $10, no big deal. Now, in terms of marketing, I did end up posting to Reddit one more time. Regardless of my tone in the Reddit posts, I was afraid that all of these posts were starting to get annoying. This was the third time, and this was going to be the last time that I post in this fashion. So rolling back over to the analytics, traffic was flowing, and it looked like the pivot had worked. We were getting about 200 users per week using the app, which was pretty solid. But even though I had consistent users and I was having fun, I was learning things, and I was using the app because it was something that I was actually passionate about, I still wasn't making money, which was pretty obvious and probably something that I should have thought about earlier because I didn't monetize the app at all. So my first instinct, and this is something that I see in a lot of fantasy football tools out there, is just throwing ads on it. Even outside of fantasy football tools, you see this everywhere. So I tried setting that up, but I kept getting rejected by Google Ads because technically my website didn't have enough content, which kind of made sense because in order to get to the content or get to the value, you had to provide an ID for your league, which Google AdSense didn't know how to do, of course. So I ended up adding a blog section and writing a bunch of blog posts, added a privacy policy and an about page, since I figured down the road those are probably useful for getting approved for ads. But after trying all of that for a few weeks, I still got rejected by Google Ads. So I thought, how could I monetize this in a way that could provide value to paying customers? So I decided I would create a premium tier that leagues could sign up for, and with this premium feature, leagues would get some special perks. And the main perk would be that you could set up notifications that would send to your league. So the exact same thing that we had built in the past would just turn into the premium feature. So on the league homepage that listed all of the league trades, I added just a little button at the top that would give users an option to upgrade their league. And on this page, I listed the benefits or perks from purchasing premium, listed the price. At this point, I just listed it at $1.99 because didn't really know what the demand would be. So definitely starting small here. And then added the PayPal integration for checking out and purchasing premium. And when the user submitted the payment, it would set some flag in the Firebase database to mark the league as premium. So from there, premium leagues could view and configure their perks. So the first perk I talked about, setting up notifications. So they could do that, put in an invite link to their league, and when they submitted, the bot that I had created before would automatically join the league, and boom, just like that, they would receive trade analysis notifications about recent trades in their league. And really all I had to do was re-enable that Firebase Functions cron job that I had used in the original approach for the app. And theoretically, it did make sense to make notifications a paid feature, because this Firebase Functions cron job was one of the few things that actually cost money to run along the way. So notifications was the main premium feature, but I did end up adding other small premium features a little bit later, and down the road I might add other premium features and possibly bump the price accordingly if it makes sense to. So the premium tier went live, and I wanted to do more marketing, get more users, but I didn't want to post this on Reddit again. There was no way I was doing that. So instead, I decided to ramp up the social media approach and create a Twitter. And really every time I tweeted or responded to someone about fantasy football, the traffic numbers would go up in analytics. So this was pretty exciting, and although fantasy football season was starting to end, 2 people had actually signed up for premium, so at $1.99 each, that led to $3.98 in revenue. So in terms of takeaways, I did feel like this was kind of successful. We built something useful, we got users, we even made a very little amount of money. I got to apply some beginner entrepreneurship skills. I got more familiar with Next.js 13 and React server components and server actions. I got familiar with collecting and sending emails, which is something I hadn't done in the past actually. And I got a lot more comfortable with analytics, even though Google Analytics is not fun to use at all. Not sure I would recommend it, and in the future, on my next project, I'm probably going to move away from it. At this point, it's just a matter of figuring out what I want to use instead of Google Analytics. But aside from those wins, building this was kind of a massive L. So technically, I didn't even profit because I only made $3.98 and the domain cost around $10. And if I really had wanted to make a lot of money, maybe I shouldn't have built a product that didn't have much interest from the beginning. Remember, we only got about 16 or 17 email signups on the initial landing page. And lastly, I should have thought about how I was going to make money from the beginning rather than building a bunch of stuff, realizing I wasn't making money and being like, oh, well, of course I'm not making money because I didn't monetize this at all or expose any kind of paid feature. So next time, if making money is the top priority, probably going to add a paid feature right off the bat. So in terms of future projects, I'm probably going to spend more time trying to validate ideas and get validated learnings before I go off and build things, which I kind of messed up here where I built something that didn't have much interest from the beginning. Again, I'm also going to think about monetization earlier and discover if the app or website can be profitable. And then lastly, and this even goes for TradeFox, I want to go through more cycles of the build, measure, learn loop, maybe even move through those cycles faster and really prioritize experimentation and learning so that I can build the right thing and build the features that people care about. So this was just the beginning. I'm excited to bring some of these topics to my next project. Not exactly sure what that project is going to be, but I might even talk about it along the way here on YouTube, or I might even do more towards TradeFox. By the way, TradeFox is still up if you want to check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. But aside from that, hopefully this was inspirational or helpful. Hopefully you got some takeaways or learnings from this experience that you can apply to building your own project. Anyways, yeah, I'm going to go figure out what to work on next, figure out what I can build that's going to be valuable so that maybe I can make some money and buy a house.